The evening light was fading as Rose pulled her worn jacket tighter around her shoulders. Another double shift at Le Ciel restaurant stretched ahead of her, and her feet already ached in the practical black shoes that had seen better days. She paused outside the employee entrance, taking a deep breath of the cool autumn air before stepping into the chaos of the kitchen. Le Ciel wasn't just any restaurant. It was the place where the city's most powerful people came to see and be seen. Politicians with perfect smiles, business owners with watches worth more than Rose's yearly salary, and celebrities who pretended they didn't want to be, noticed all gathered under the crystal chandeliers to pick at overpriced food and talk about things that people like Rose couldn't understand. "You're cutting it close," said Hank, the head chef, not looking up from the sauce he was stirring. His voice wasn't unkind, just stating a fact. "Sorry," Rose said, hurrying to the small locker room to change. The bus was late again. She quickly tied her long dark hair back into a neat bun and slipped into her black and white uniform. 3 years of working here, and she still felt like she was playing dress-up in clothes that didn't quite fit her life. But the tips were good enough to help pay for Grandma Lily's medicine and keep their tiny apartment for another month. "Big night tonight," said Tanya, another waitress who was touching up her makeup in the small mirror they all shared. Some fancy music people rented out the whole place, supposedly raising money for the symphony or something. Rose nodded, pinning her name tag carefully to her shirt. "I heard. Mr. Chen was talking about it all week." What she didn't say was how her heart had jumped when she'd first learned about the event. Music people. Here. In the same room where she'd be carrying plates and refilling water glasses. People who lived in the world she'd once thought would be hers, before everything fell apart. "Better get out there," Tanya said, closing her lipstick. "Chen's been pacing around like a nervous cat all afternoon." Rose finished getting ready and stepped out into the dining area. The restaurant was transformed. Small spotlights highlighted the white flowers on each table. The regular chairs had been replaced with more elegant ones covered in deep blue fabric. And there, in the corner, stood a magnificent grand piano, its polished surface gleaming under the lights. Something tightened in Rose's chest at the sight of it. Her fingers twitched slightly at her sides, a reflex she couldn't control even after all these years. "Rose." Mr. Chen's voice snapped her out of her thoughts. He was a small man with perfectly combed hair and a permanent look of worry on his face. "I need you on tables 3 through 7 tonight. Very important guests. Very, very important. The mayor will be at table 5. And the symphony director, what's his name? Mr. Brown." "No, wait, Mr. Black?" "Maestro Davis," Rose said quietly. Mr. Chen looked surprised. "Yes, that's it." "You know him?" Rose shook her head quickly. "I just read about him sometimes. In the newspaper." She didn't mention the stack of concert programs hidden in her bedside drawer, or how she'd once stood outside the concert hall for hours just to catch a glimpse of the famous conductor as he arrived for a performance she couldn't afford to attend. "Well, he'll be at table 4. Remember, these people can make or break our reputation. Everything must be perfect." As Mr. Chen hurried away to check on something in the kitchen, Rose walked slowly around the room, making sure each table was flawless. Napkins folded just right, silverware perfectly aligned, water glasses spotless. Her eyes kept drifting to the piano. It had been 5 years since she'd touched a real piano. 5 years since her family had been forced to sell the upright that had stood in their living room, the one her mother had taught her on when she was just 4 years old, her little legs dangling from the bench. The one she had practiced on for hours every day, preparing for her audition at the National Conservatory of Music. Now, the only keys her fingers pressed were on the old keyboard she'd found at a thrift shop. It was missing 3 keys and the sound was nothing like a real piano, but it was better than nothing. She practiced late at night with headphones on, after Grandma Lily had gone to sleep, trying to keep the music alive inside her. The guests began arriving at 7. Rose stood at attention with the other waitstaff as the first well-dressed couples entered the dining room. They handed their coats to the coat check person without really seeing him. They smiled at each other, air-kissed cheeks, and talked in loud, confident voices about summer homes and boarding schools and investment opportunities. And then there was music, not from the piano, but from a string quartet in the corner, playing something light and pleasant that no one really listened to. Background music, like Rose herself, was background to these people's important lives. She moved through the room like a shadow, refilling water glasses before they were empty, clearing plates the moment they were finished, answering questions without being noticed. "Yes, sir. The salmon is wild caught." "No, ma'am. There's no dairy in that sauce." "Right away, sir." "Of course, ma'am." Some of the guests wore jewelry that could have paid for Grandma Lily's heart surgery 3 times over. Some talked about their children at prestigious universities, the same universities that had once sent Rose brochures because of her music achievements. Before everything changed, did you hear about the pianist? Rose overheard one woman saying to another as she cleared their appetizer plates. Apparently he came down with food poisoning or something equally inconvenient. "No," the other woman gasped. "What will they do? Isn't the whole point of this event to support the music program?" Rose's hands froze for just a second, then continued stacking plates. "I heard Mr. Chen talking about it earlier," said Tanya when they met in the kitchen. "The pianist canceled last minute. Chen's about to have a heart attack over it." Through the kitchen doors, Rose could see Mr. Chen talking frantically with a tall, distinguished-looking man, Maestro Davis himself, his silver hair gleaming under the lights. Even from here she could see the tight line of the conductor's mouth, his disappointment clear. For a moment, just a moment, a wild thought crossed Rose's mind. But then she pushed it away. That wasn't her life anymore. She was Rose the waitress now, not Rose the pianist. That girl had disappeared when Dad got sick and the medical bills piled up, and Mom had to work 3 jobs and there was no more money for music lessons or dreams of concert halls. The evening continued. The string quartet played on. Speeches were made about the importance of supporting the arts, about giving opportunities to talented young musicians, about how music enriched all lives. Rose served the main course, watching as people who could afford to donate thousands of dollars nodded in agreement, their expressions serious and concerned. No one looked at Rose. No one wondered if she had ever loved music. No one could see how each note from the string quartet both soothed and stung her. At 9 o'clock there was a subtle shift in the room. The speeches had ended. The dessert had been served. And now people were looking expectantly toward the piano, the empty piano with no one to play it. Mr. Chen was sweating visibly now, moving between tables, offering more wine, more dessert, anything to distract from the missing centerpiece of the evening. Rose was clearing a table when she heard Maestro Davis speaking to the woman beside him. "It's a shame," he said, his deep voice carrying to where Rose stood. "That Steinway is one of the finest instruments in the city. To have it sit silent tonight of all nights." Rose looked at the piano again. In the 3 years she'd worked at Le Ciel, she'd never seen a piano in the dining room before. This was probably the only chance she would ever have to touch an instrument like that. Her heart began to beat faster. She finished clearing the table and walked slowly to the kitchen, her mind racing. What was the worst that could happen? She would embarrass herself. Get fired, maybe. But a new thought was taking hold, drowning out her fear. What if this was her only chance? Before she could talk herself out of it, Rose set down her tray and walked over to Mr. Chen, who was frantically checking his phone, probably hoping for a last-minute replacement. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice so quiet he had to lean in to hear her. "I can play." He stared at her as if she'd started speaking another language. "What? The piano?" Rose said, nodding toward the gleaming instrument. "I can play it," Mr. Chen laughed nervously. "Rose, this isn't karaoke night. These people are from the symphony." "I know," she said, her voice steadier now. "I studied piano for 15 years. I was accepted to the National Conservatory before—" She swallowed. "Before I couldn't go." Mr. Chen looked at her differently then, really seeing her for the first time. "You're serious?" Rose nodded. "Let me try one song. If it's terrible, I'll go back to serving right away." He hesitated, looking around at the increasingly restless crowd, then back at Rose. "One song," he finally said. "But if you embarrass us—" "I won't," Rose promised, though her heart was now pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips, the fingers that would soon touch those beautiful keys. She untied her apron and handed it to a wide-eyed Tanya. Then, gathering all her courage, Rose walked across the dining room toward the piano. A few heads turned to watch the waitress who had been invisible all evening as she approached the grand piano, with unexpected purpose in her step. The chatter in the room gradually died down as more people noticed her. By the time Rose reached the piano bench and carefully sat down, the room was almost completely silent. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for just a moment, and placed her hands on the keys. The first notes filled the room like drops of water in a still pond, creating ripples of silence that spread from table to table. Rose had chosen Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor, a piece that told a story without words, a piece that had always felt like her own story somehow. Her fingers moved tentatively at first. It had been so long since she'd touched a real piano, an instrument worthy of the music. The keyboard in her tiny apartment with its plastic keys and tinny sound was nothing like this magnificent Steinway with its rich, resonant voice that seemed to answer her touch with a voice of its own. By the eighth measure, something shifted. It was like stepping through a doorway into a familiar room, a room she hadn't visited in years but still knew by heart. Her shoulders relaxed. Her breathing deepened. The restaurant, the wealthy patrons, Mr. Chen's anxious face. All of it faded away until there was only the music. Across the room, conversations halted mid-sentence. Wineglasses paused halfway to lips. The string quartet members exchanged glances of surprise. All eyes turned to the young woman at the piano, the same woman who had been refilling their water glasses and taking away their empty plates all evening. Rose played with her whole body now, leaning into the dramatic passages, her face reflecting every emotional shift in the music. The technically challenging runs, the ones that had once made her hands cramp during long practice sessions, flowed from her fingers as if they had never forgotten, as if they had just been waiting for this moment. At table 4, Maestro Davis sat completely still, his dinner forgotten. The symphony director, who had listened to some of the finest pianists in the world, found himself holding his breath as the waitress navigated a particularly difficult section with astonishing grace. His trained ear recognized something rare, not just technical skill, but that impossible-to-teach quality that separated good musicians from great ones. The ability to make listeners feel something deep and true. Mr. Chen stood frozen near the kitchen doors, his mouth slightly open. This was not what he had expected when Rose had approached him. He had been prepared for something adequate, something that would fill the awkward silence. A simple tune, perhaps, or a basic classical piece played competently enough. Not this storm of music that had transformed his restaurant into a concert hall and his waitress into whatever she was becoming before his eyes. As Rose approached the piece's demanding coda, her confidence grew. The music poured out of her, all the disappointments of the past 5 years, all the dreams she had carefully packed away, all the times she had looked at her tired hands and wondered if they would ever create beauty again, but also gratitude for her mother who had sacrificed to give her lessons, for her grandmother who still asked her to play on the broken keyboard sometimes, for the music itself that had never completely left her. The final notes lingered in the air, and then there was silence, a silence so complete you could hear the flame of the candles flickering on the tables. Rose's hands hovered above the keys, trembling slightly. She didn't dare look up, didn't dare break the spell that had somehow carried her through the piece without a mistake. Then came the sound of a chair scraping against the floor. Someone had stood up. Then another person, and another. Suddenly the room erupted in applause, not the polite, measured applause of people who were simply being courteous, but the genuine, spontaneous applause of people who had been moved. Rose finally looked up, her cheeks flushed. She saw Mr. Chen staring at her as if seeing a ghost. She saw Tanya by the kitchen door, hands pressed to her mouth in surprise. And she saw Maestro Davis on his feet, his usually stern face transformed by an expression of wonder. Encore, called a woman from table 7, the same woman who had barely glanced at Rose when asking for more bread earlier in the evening. The call was taken up by others. Encore, encore. Rose's heart pounded. She had prepared herself to play one piece, had summoned every bit of courage for just that. But now, with the applause washing over her, she felt something long dormant awakening inside her. She had missed this feeling, the connection with listeners, the shared journey through sound. She turned back to the piano and began Debussy's Clair de Lune. Where the Chopin had been passionate and dramatic, this piece was delicate and luminous, like moonlight on water. Her touch became lighter, more ethereal. She shaped each phrase with care, bringing out the subtle harmonies that made this piece beloved by both musicians and casual listeners. Several people in the audience closed their eyes, transported by the gentle beauty of the music. A woman at table 6 wiped away a tear. Even the waitstaff had stopped their work to listen, water pitchers and serving trays momentarily forgotten. When the final notes of the Debussy faded away, there was another round of enthusiastic applause. This time, Rose stood and gave a small awkward bow, unsure of the proper protocol. She had never performed in a setting like this. Her performances had been in school recitals and community competitions, before everything changed. She was about to return to her serving duties when Maestro Davis approached the piano. The distinguished conductor, known for his exacting standards and rare praise, stood before her with an expression of keen interest. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice carrying in the now quiet room. "Rose," she replied softly. "Rose Nguyen." "Miss Nguyen," he said formally. "Your playing is remarkable, particularly for someone who works." He gestured vaguely at the restaurant around them. "As a waitress," Rose finished for him, lifting her chin slightly. "There was no shame in honest work," her grandmother always said. "Yes," Maestro Davis said, looking somewhat embarrassed. "Where did you study?" Rose hesitated. "I didn't, not formally. I mean, I had lessons from Mrs. Wong in our neighborhood for years, and then from Mr. Abramovich at the community center. I was accepted to the conservatory, but—" She stopped, not wanting to share her family's financial troubles with a room full of strangers. "But you couldn't attend." The conductor finished for her, nodding with understanding. "My dad got sick," Rose said simply. "There were hospital bills, and then we lost our house. The piano went first. Then everything else." A murmur went through the crowd. Many of the people in the room had never had to choose between education and survival, between dreams and necessities. They had never known what it was like to sell a beloved instrument to pay for medicine. "And yet you play like that," Maestro Davis said, gesturing to the piano, "without a proper instrument to practice on. Without formal training." Rose shrugged slightly. "I have a keyboard. It's not the same, but—" "No, it's not the same at all," agreed the conductor. He studied her face for a moment, then reached into his pocket and handed her a card. "Come to my office tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. We have a special program for exceptional talents. It's not too late." Rose stared at the card in her hand. Heavy cream-colored cardstock with the symphony's gold logo embossed at the top. Was this really happening? Before she could respond, another person approached. It was Mrs. Blackwell, the chairwoman of the symphony board, a formidable woman with perfectly coiffed silver hair and an expression that was usually polite but distant. Rose had served her table enough times to know she liked her steaks medium rare and never drank more than 2 glasses of wine. "My dear," Mrs. Blackwell said, taking Rose's hand in both of hers, "where have you been hiding? We've been coming here for years and no one ever mentioned we had a concert pianist serving our meals." "I'm not a concert pianist," Rose said quickly. "You most certainly are," interrupted Mrs. Blackwell firmly. "Or you will be, with the right support. I'd like to discuss establishing a scholarship in your name. No one with your gift should be prevented from pursuing it because of financial circumstances." Rose felt dizzy. This morning, she had been worrying about making rent this month. Now these people were talking about scholarships and special programs, as if her dream had never died. As if the past 5 years of struggle had just been a brief intermission. Mr. Chen appeared at her elbow, beaming with pride as if he had discovered her talent himself. "Rose has been with us for 3 years, he told the gathering crowd. "Always very reliable, very good worker, and wasted on carrying plates," said Maestro Davis pointedly. Mr. Chen cleared his throat. "Perhaps not wasted anymore. Rose," he turned to her, "you can play here whenever you want. In fact, I'd like to offer you a position as our regular pianist. The salary would be considerably more than what you make serving tables." Rose's hand tightened around the conductor's card. Was this real? After years of thinking that part of her life was over, could it actually be beginning again? "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Say you'll play one more piece," called someone from the back of the room, and others quickly agreed. Rose looked at Mr. Chen, who nodded encouragingly. She sat down at the piano again, taking a moment to decide what to play. Then her fingers found the opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, a piece that began with a solemn, almost mournful theme, but built to a triumphant conclusion. Just like her own story might be doing right now. As she played, Rose allowed herself to hope again, something she hadn't done in a very long time. The Rachmaninoff filled the room with its rich, complex emotions. Rose felt something unlocking inside her with each measure, as if she had been living in a small, dark room for years, and someone was finally opening all the windows, letting in light and air. Her fingers remembered things her mind had tried to forget. The joy of creating something beautiful, the freedom of expressing what words couldn't say, the piece built to its powerful conclusion, and when the final chord rang out, the applause was immediate and overwhelming. People who had spent their lives attending concerts at the finest venues in the world were on their feet, clapping as enthusiastically as if they were at Carnegie Hall instead of a restaurant fundraiser. "Brava," called a gray-haired man near the back. "Brava." Rose stood and bowed again, more confidently this time. Her legs felt a little shaky and her heart was racing. But there was also a sense of rightness that she hadn't felt in years. This was what she was meant to do. She had known it since she was a little girl sitting at her mother's old upright piano, stretching her small hands to reach the chords. Before she could return to the piano for another encore, she felt a touch on her arm. It was Tanya, her fellow waitress, eyes wide with excitement. "Rose, your phone's been buzzing like crazy in the break room," Tanya whispered. "It's your grandma. She says she's watching you on someone's phone. I don't understand, but she sounds really happy." Rose frowned in confusion. "Watching me? How?" Mr. Doyle, one of the regular customers who always left generous tips, stepped forward with his smartphone held up. "I've been live streaming your performance on my social media," he explained, looking a bit sheepish. "I hope that's okay. It's just, people needed to hear this. You've got almost 5,000 viewers right now." 5,000? Rose echoed, her voice faint. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Mr. Doyle turned his phone so she could see the screen. There, in a small window, was her own image at the piano, and alongside it, a rapidly scrolling feed of comments and heart emojis. "My grandmother can't leave her bed," Rose said slowly, understanding dawning. "She hasn't heard me play on a real piano since—" "Well, she's hearing you now," said Tanya with a grin. "And so is half the internet, looks like." Rose didn't know whether to laugh or cry. All those nights playing on her broken keyboard with headphones on, thinking no one could hear her. And now thousands of strangers were listening. And Grandma Lily, who had always been her biggest supporter, who had insisted they keep the keyboard even when they had to sell almost everything else, was watching too. Can I say hello to her?" Rose asked, nodding at the phone. Mr. Doyle handed it over, showing her which button to press to see the comments. Rose scanned through them quickly, looking for her grandmother's name. There it was. Lilyflower 75, writing in all caps. "That's my granddaughter." "My Rose!" Rose waved at the camera, blinking back tears. "Hi, Grandma," she said softly. "I'm playing on a real piano again. Can you hear how beautiful it sounds?" She handed the phone back to Mr. Doyle, feeling suddenly overwhelmed. So much had happened in the last 30 minutes that her brain couldn't quite process it all. Maestro Davis cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should give Miss Nguyen a moment to catch her breath," he suggested, addressing the crowd. "We've imposed on her good nature long enough this evening." But the audience wasn't ready to let Rose go just yet. They had questions, so many questions. Where had she learned to play like that? How old was she when she started? What were her favorite pieces? Did she compose as well as perform? Rose answered as best she could, still feeling like she was in some kind of wonderful dream. She told them about her mother, who had worked extra shifts to pay for her lessons. About Mrs. Wong, who had recognized her talent when she was just 6 years old, and given her advanced pieces that should have been too difficult for such small hands. About Mr. Abramovich, who had helped her prepare for competitions and who had cried real tears when she told him she couldn't afford to continue her lessons. "And you just gave it all up?" asked a young woman about Rose's age, looking horrified at the thought. She wore a designer dress that probably cost more than Rose's monthly rent, and had never known what it was like to choose between pursuing a dream and putting food on the table. "I didn't give it up," Rose corrected gently. "I just put it aside for a while. Life happens, you know. My dad got sick, and then we lost our house, and there were bills to pay. Music became a luxury we couldn't afford." "But you kept playing," Maestro Davis observed. "It wasn't a question," Rose nodded. "When I could. On my keyboard at home. Sometimes on the public piano in the train station, if I had a few minutes between buses." There was a moment of silence as the well-dressed crowd tried to imagine this reality. Tried to imagine what it would be like to have such a gift and nowhere to use it. To work double shifts serving food to people who never really saw you. To snatch moments of music between the demands of survival. Mrs. Blackwell broke the silence. "Well, that ends tonight," she declared in a tone that suggested she was not a woman accustomed to being contradicted. "Maestro Davis has invited you to his office tomorrow, and I expect you'll find that the symphony has several programs that would be lucky to have you. And as I mentioned, I intend to establish a scholarship in your name. It's the least we can do after enjoying your talent tonight." Rose began to protest. It was too much. Too generous, but Mrs. Blackwell waved her objections away. "My dear, I've been on the symphony board for 20 years, she said firmly. "Do you know how rare it is to hear someone play with the kind of emotion you just showed us? Technical skill can be taught. What you have, that can't be taught. That's a gift, and it would be a crime to let it go to waste any longer." Mr. Chen, who had been hovering nearby throughout this exchange, stepped forward again. "I meant what I said about the pianist position," he told Rose. 3 nights a week to start. We can work around your classes if you go back to school." Rose looked around at all these people who suddenly wanted to help her, who suddenly saw her, and felt a strange mix of gratitude and caution. She had learned the hard way that life could change in an instant, that dreams could be put on hold indefinitely. Part of her was afraid to hope too much, to believe that things could really be different. "I need to think about all this," she said finally. "It's a lot to take in." "Of course," agreed Maestro Davis, "but don't think too long. My office, 9 o'clock tomorrow. Opportunities like this don't come along every day." As the crowd began to disperse, returning to their tables for coffee and more conversation, Rose made her way back to the employee area. Her legs still felt shaky, and her mind was racing with possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider for years. Tanya was waiting for her by the lockers, practically bouncing with excitement. "Oh my God, Rose. You're famous. Look at this." She thrust her phone at Rose, showing a social media page where Mr. Doyle's live stream had been shared hundreds of times already. "And Mr. Chen told me to tell you that you don't have to finish your shift tonight. You can go home if you want." Rose sank onto the bench by the lockers, suddenly aware of how emotionally drained she felt. "I think I need to sit for a minute first," she said with a weak smile. "Take all the time you need, superstar," Tanya replied with a grin. "But you might want to see this first." She handed Rose a small stack of business cards and folded notes. "People kept giving me these to pass on to you. Some music producer, a guy who books entertainment for some fancy hotel, someone from a record label, I think. Oh, and like 3 phone numbers from single guys who were super impressed." Rose flipped through the cards in disbelief. Just hours ago, these same people wouldn't have noticed if she'd disappeared from the room. Now they were offering her jobs, opportunities, connections. "What are you going to do?" Tanya asked, watching her face. Rose took a deep breath. "First I'm going to call my grandmother," she said decisively. "Then I'm going to go home and sleep, because I think I need to be very clear-headed for that meeting tomorrow." She changed out of her uniform slowly, still processing everything that had happened. As she walked through the restaurant toward the exit, people smiled at her, nodded respectfully, a few even applauded again softly. The string quartet members gave her thumbs-up signs from their corner. Just before she reached the door, Rose paused and looked back at the piano, the instrument that had changed everything tonight. On impulse, she walked over to it one last time and gently touched the keys, pressing one note so quietly that only she could hear it. "Thank you," she whispered to the piano, to the music, to whatever twist of fate had placed her in this restaurant on this night when the regular pianist couldn't come. Outside, the night air felt cool on her flushed cheeks. Rose looked up at the stars, bright and clear above the city lights, and for the first time in 5 long years, she let herself dream again about what might be possible. Rose barely slept that night. She lay awake in the small bedroom of the apartment she shared with her grandmother, staring at the ceiling as the events of the evening played over and over in her mind. The feeling of the piano keys beneath her fingers, the hushed silence of the crowd, the thunderous applause, the business cards now stacked neatly on her nightstand. Was this really happening, or would she wake up to find it had all been a dream? She had called Grandma Lily from the restaurant and they had cried together. Happy tears, the kind they hadn't shed in a long time. Her grandmother had watched the entire performance on a neighbor's phone and couldn't stop talking about how proud she was, how she always knew this day would come. How Rose's mother would have been overjoyed to see her daughter play again. Your hands were made for music, not for carrying plates, Grandma Lily had said firmly. I've been telling you that for years. Around 3 in the morning, Rose finally gave up on sleep and quietly made her way to the corner of the living room where her old keyboard stood on a folding table. She put on headphones so she wouldn't wake her grandmother and began to play the same pieces she had performed at the restaurant, testing herself, seeing if it had been a fluke. It hadn't been. The music was still there inside her, maybe even stronger than before. All those years of playing on this inadequate instrument, of keeping the flame alive even when it seemed pointless, it had been worth it. She hadn't lost her gift after all. By 7, Rose was showered and dressed in the nicest clothes she owned. Black pants that were a little worn at the knees and a blue blouse she had found at a thrift store. Nothing fancy but clean and presentable. She made coffee and toast, then gently woke her grandmother to let her know she was leaving. Grandma Lily was already awake, sitting up in bed with an old photo album open on her lap. I was looking at pictures of you when you were little, she explained, pointing to a faded photograph of a small girl seated at a piano much too big for her. Your first recital. You were 6. Do you remember? Rose smiled, sitting on the edge of the bed. I remember being so nervous I thought I might throw up. And then once I started playing, everything was okay. Just like last night, her grandmother said with a knowing nod. Some things don't change. She reached for Rose's hand, her own fingers twisted with arthritis but still strong. Whatever happens today, remember who you are. You're not just a girl who can play piano. You're a girl who has worked hard, who has taken care of her family, who hasn't given up even when things were tough. That matters more than any talent. Rose squeezed her grandmother's hand, blinking back tears. I'll remember, she promised. The bus ride downtown was a blur. Rose clutched Maestro Davis's business card, double-checking the address, though she had memorized it already. The Symphony Building was imposing, all glass and concrete with the names of famous composers etched into stone panels beside the entrance. Rose had walked past it many times over the years but had never been inside. It had seemed like another world, one that wasn't open to people like her anymore. At the reception desk, she gave her name nervously, half expecting to be turned away. Instead, the receptionist smiled warmly. Yes, Miss Nguyen. Maestro Davis is expecting you. 5th floor, suite 501. The elevator ride gave Rose a moment to catch her breath and prepare herself. What exactly was she hoping for here? A chance to study again? A scholarship? A job? After so many years of narrowed horizons, of focusing just on getting through each day, it was hard to think bigger. The elevator doors opened on the 5th floor, and Rose followed the signs to suite 501. The door was open, and through it she could see Maestro Davis seated at a desk reviewing some papers. He looked up as she hesitated in the doorway. Ah, Miss Nguyen, right on time. Please come in. He rose to greet her, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. Rose sat, trying not to fidget with the strap of her worn purse. The office was elegant but not flashy, filled with books, scores, and framed concert programs. A small piano stood in the corner. I've been making some calls this morning, Maestro Davis began, sitting back down. After your performance last night, I wanted to explore what options might be available to someone in your unique situation. Rose nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. You're how old now? 23? 25, she corrected. The conductor made a note on a pad in front of him. A bit older than our typical students, but not unheard of, especially for someone with your obvious gift. He looked up, fixing her with a penetrating gaze. Tell me honestly, Miss Nguyen, what do you want? The question caught her off guard. What did she want? For so long, what she wanted hadn't mattered. There had been bills to pay, her grandmother to care for, survival to think about. I want... Rose began slowly, searching for the right words. I want to play, really play, not just for myself late at night with headphones on. I want to learn everything I've missed. I want to see how good I can actually be. She took a deep breath. And I want to make sure my grandmother is taken care of. Maestro Davis nodded as if this was the answer he had expected. Well, I think we can help with that. Mrs. Blackwell wasn't just making empty promises last night. She's serious about establishing a scholarship in your name, one that would cover full tuition for our 2-year intensive program, plus a modest living stipend. Rose's heart leapt, but caution held her back. That's incredibly generous, she said carefully. But I still need to work. My grandmother's medicine alone costs— Yes, yes, I understand, Maestro Davis interrupted, waving a hand impatiently. That's why I've also spoken with Mr. Chen this morning. He's quite eager to have you as the restaurant's regular pianist, 3 evenings a week, as he mentioned. The pay would be significantly better than what you make as a waitress, and the hours would accommodate your studies. Rose could hardly believe what she was hearing. So I could study here? And work at the restaurant playing piano? Precisely. Maestro Davis slid a folder across the desk to her. Here's all the information about the program. We typically start new students in September, but given your circumstances and talent, we'd be willing to make an exception and have you begin next month. Rose opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were brochures about the symphony's training program, a letter confirming the scholarship offer, and a class schedule. It was real. This was actually happening. There's one more thing, the conductor said, his expression softening slightly. I took the liberty of contacting an old colleague of mine, Dr. Lin at City Memorial Hospital. I mentioned your grandmother's condition, and she's willing to see her as a patient in their specialized elder care program. They have resources for people with limited income. At this, tears sprang to Rose's eyes. She had been trying for months to get her grandmother into a better healthcare program, making calls during her breaks at the restaurant, filling out endless forms, always hitting dead ends. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Why are you doing all this for me? Maestro Davis leaned back in his chair, considering her question seriously. Do you know how many piano students graduate from top conservatories every year, Miss Nguyen? Hundreds, all technically brilliant, all hardworking, all educated at the finest schools with the best teachers. He paused. And do you know how many of them will move an audience to tears, the way you did last night with nothing but raw talent and a broken heart? Very, very few. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. Music isn't just about playing the right notes at the right time. It's about having something to say. You have something to say, Miss Nguyen. Something people need to hear. Rose sat quietly, absorbing his words. After a moment, Maestro Davis turned back to her. There's the piano, he said, nodding toward the instrument in the corner of his office. Why don't you play something for me? Something different from what you performed last night. I'd like to get a sense of your range. Rose moved to the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys. This instrument wasn't as grand as the one at the restaurant, but it had a warm, intimate sound that felt right for this moment. She thought for a moment, then began to play. She chose Bach this time, the prelude in C major from the Well-Tempered Clavier. It was the first piece her mother had taught her, simple yet profound. The notes rippled like clear water over stones, each one distinct yet part of a greater whole. As she played, Rose felt the tension leaving her body. Whatever came next, classes, performances, a new beginning, she was ready. The music had never left her, even during the darkest times. It had just been waiting, like a faithful friend, for her to find her way back. Maestro Davis listened with his eyes closed, occasionally nodding slightly as if confirming something to himself. When Rose finished, there was a moment of respectful silence. Yes, he said finally. You'll do very well here, Miss Nguyen. Very well indeed. Outside the symphony building, Rose blinked in the bright morning sunlight. She had a stack of papers to fill out, arrangements to make, a whole new life to step into. But first, she needed to tell Grandma Lily. She pulled out her phone and dialed home, her heart so full it felt like it might overflow. Grandma? You won't believe what just happened. 1 year later, Rose stood in the wings of the concert hall, peering out at the audience filling the seats. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but this time the nervousness felt different, more like excitement than fear. She smoothed down the front of her simple black dress, a gift from Mrs. Blackwell for this special occasion. You ready, kid? Asked Professor Watkins, her main instructor for the past year, appearing at her side. The older woman had been tough on Rose from day one, pushing her harder than any of the other students, refusing to let her use her late start as an excuse for anything less than excellence. I think so, Rose replied, taking a deep breath. Is my grandmother front row center, just where you asked for her to be? Professor Watkins assured her with a rare smile. And looking very proud already, Rose nodded, blinking back tears. What a year it had been. The scholarship had changed everything, allowing her to fully immerse herself in music again. The intensive program had been exactly that, intensive. There had been days when her fingers ached so badly she could barely type a text message. Nights when she fell asleep with sheet music scattered across her bed. Mornings when she woke up hearing melodies in her head that hadn't been there before. But there had been joy too. The pure happiness of doing what she loved. Of being surrounded by people who spoke the same musical language. Of learning things she had thought she would never have the chance to learn. And all while still playing 3 nights a week at Le Ciel, where regular customers now made reservations specifically on the nights when Rose is playing. Mr. Chen had given her complete freedom to choose her own program, and she had built a loyal following, people who came not just for the food but for the music. 2 minutes, said the stage manager, clipboard in hand. You're up after the dean's introduction. Rose nodded, trying to calm her racing thoughts. This recital, her first official solo performance as part of the program, was the culmination of everything she had worked for this past year. Her teachers would be watching. Future employers would be watching. Music critics might even be in the audience, but most importantly, Grandma Lily would be watching. Through the scholarship and her job at the restaurant, Rose had been able to move them both to a better apartment closer to the Symphony building. And with Dr. Lin's help, her grandmother now had the medical care she needed with a home health aide who came 3 times a week. For the first time in years, Rose didn't have to worry about keeping a roof over their heads or whether they could afford the medications. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our spring showcase, came the dean's voice from the stage, cutting through Rose's thoughts. Tonight we are pleased to present a student whose journey to our program was unconventional, to say the least. There were a few knowing chuckles from the audience. Rose's story had become something of a legend at the Symphony. The waitress who had stunned everyone with her playing, who had been discovered purely by chance. In just 1 year with us, she has made remarkable progress, confirming what those who heard her that fateful night already knew, that sometimes extraordinary talent finds a way to shine through, no matter the obstacles. Please welcome to the stage, Rose Nguyen. Rose walked out onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding her. She could make out faces in the front row, Grandma Lily in a new blue dress beaming with pride, Mrs. Blackwell elegant as always, Mr. Chen with his entire family, Tanya from the restaurant giving her a thumbs up, and even Maestro Davis, who had become a mentor despite his busy international schedule. She bowed, then took her seat at the grand piano. This was a different instrument from the one at the restaurant, different from the one in Maestro Davis's office, different from the worn keyboard she had practiced on for so many years. Yet they were all connected in her mind, stepping stones that had led her to this moment. Rose took a deep breath and began to play. She had chosen Beethoven's Sonata No. 8 in C minor, known as the Pathétique, for the first part of her program. It seemed fitting, a piece that began with slow, somber chords before erupting into passionate allegro, mirroring her own journey from struggle to triumph. As she played, Rose allowed her mind to travel back over the winding path that had brought her here. The early lessons with her mother, the competitions she had won as a teenager, the crushing disappointment when her father's illness had derailed everything, the years of working double shifts, of playing in secret, of believing that her dreams were behind her, and then that night, that incredible night when everything had changed, because a stranger had fallen ill and a piano had stood empty and she had found the courage to step forward. The music poured out of her, every note infused with the story of her life, not just the pain and the struggle, but also the moments of unexpected kindness, the enduring love of her family, the stubborn hope that had never quite died even in the darkest times. When she finished the first piece, the applause was warm and enthusiastic. Rose smiled and nodded her acknowledgement, then prepared for her next selection. For this, she had chosen something unexpected, a piece she had composed herself over the past year, with guidance from her composition teacher. She had titled it simply Waiting Tables, Waiting Dreams, and it incorporated elements of classical structure with hints of the jazz she had heard playing in the restaurant kitchen, the pop songs Tanya was always humming, and even echoes of the Vietnamese folk music her grandmother sang while cooking. As Rose began to play her own composition, she felt a fresh wave of emotion. This piece was entirely hers, not just her interpretation of someone else's work, but her own voice, her own story. She had never imagined, during those years of struggle, that she would someday not just play music but create it too. The audience listened with rapt attention. This wasn't what they had expected. It was better, more personal, more authentic. When the final notes faded away, there was a moment of silence before the applause began. Hesitant at first, then building to a thunderous ovation. Rose stood and bowed deeply. She could see Grandma Lily in the front row, tears streaming down her face, clapping harder than anyone. Their eyes met, and in that moment, all the sacrifices, all the hard work, all the years of keeping the faith, it had all been worth it. For her final selection of the evening, Rose had chosen Debussy's Clair de Lune, the same piece she had played as her second encore that night at the restaurant. But her interpretation had evolved over the past year, deepened by her studies, by the guidance of her teachers, by the growth in her own understanding of music and life. The piece was like moonlight itself, gentle, luminous, transformative. Rose played it not as a technical exercise but as a gift, to her younger self who had never stopped believing, to her grandmother who had sacrificed so much, to the strangers who had taken a chance on a waitress at a piano, and to everyone who had ever held on to a dream when logic said to let it go. When the final notes faded away, the audience rose to their feet. The applause seemed to go on forever, washing over Rose in waves. After several bows, Rose left the stage only to be immediately surrounded by fellow students and teachers offering congratulations. Professor Watkins gave her a quick, fierce hug before stepping back with embarrassment. "Well done," she said gruffly. "Very well done indeed." But Rose was looking past them all, searching for the one person she most wanted to see. And there she was, Grandma Lily, being escorted backstage by one of the ushers, her face glowing with pride. "Grandma." Rose hurried to her, carefully embracing the frail but strong woman who had been her rock through everything. "My Rose," her grandmother said, cupping her face with veined hands. "Your mother would have been so proud." "I know," Rose whispered. "I felt her with me tonight." Later at the reception, Rose found herself surrounded by well-wishers, including several representatives from prestigious music academies offering advanced study opportunities, and an agent interested in arranging a small tour. It was overwhelming and exciting, doors opening that she had never imagined would be open to her again. "Quite a difference from this time last year, isn't it?" said a familiar voice. Rose turned to find Maestro Davis beside her, champagne flute in hand. "It's like a dream," she admitted. "Sometimes I still expect to wake up and find myself back at the restaurant carrying plates." "Not a dream," he corrected. "The result of talent, yes, but more importantly, of persistence. You never gave up on music, even when it seemed music had given up on you." Rose smiled, thinking of those nights playing on her broken keyboard, keeping the flame alive. "I guess some things are just part of who you are," she said simply. "You can't give them up even when it seems hopeless." "Well said." The conductor raised his glass in a small toast. "To never giving up." "To never giving up," Rose echoed, raising her own glass, her heart full of gratitude for second chances and unexpected miracles. And somewhere in the crowd, a young custodian who had been listening from the back of the concert hall slipped away quietly, a new determination in his eyes as he thought of the half-finished paintings hidden under his bed, the dreams he had set aside, and the courage it might take to bring them into the light.